Imagine global rock legend Chris Martin, the frontman of Coldplay, stepping into the world of K-pop and secretly dropping a bombshell ranking about global superstars, BTS. We all know their legendary collaboration, My Universe, shattered charts. But what if behind the studio doors and warm hugs lay hilarious observations about who gets pampered the most, who truly takes the crown as the most spoiled member, and who sits at the bottom as the humble golden boy? Get ready to uncover a side of BTS you've never heard before. Number 7. Namjoon. When Chris Martin stepped into the legendary Hybe Studios in Seoul, bracing himself to meet the global juggernauts that had taken the entire world by storm, he expected a room full of demanding pop divas, but instead, his eyes immediately locked onto the towering, dimpled presence of Kim Namjoon, better known as RM, who firmly takes the spot at number 7 as the absolute least spoiled member of the entire group. Picture this. Amidst the swirling chaos of flash and cameras, nervous music producers, and the buzzing electric energy of a historical cross-continental collaboration, RM wasn't sitting back on a velvet couch demanding artisan coffee or expecting staff to cater to his every whim. He was leaning intently over the mixing console, his brow furrowed in deep concentration, carrying the invisible yet crushing weight of the entire world on his broad shoulders. Chris Martin, a seasoned frontman himself who knows a thing or two about the grueling, soul-draining demands of keeping a world-famous band from splintering, RM instantly recognized that familiar, solitary exhaustion in RM's eyes, the quiet, relentless sacrifice of a leader who invariably puts himself last. While the music industry is notoriously saturated with artists who revel in being pampered, throwing massive tantrums if their green room lacks a specific brand of imported sparkling water, RM operates on a fundamentally different, almost monastic frequency. During the recording sessions of My Universe, Chris observed in awe how RM instinctively morphed into the crucial load-bearing bridge between two entirely different cultures and generations, effortlessly toggling between English and Korean, making sure every single one of his members felt comfortable, understood, and creatively fulfilled, completely forgetting to ask if he himself needed a break or a glass of water. It is an emotionally overwhelming realization when you strip away the dazzling stadium lights, the screaming crowds, and the billion-dollar revenue streams to see a young man from Ilsan who is so deeply entrenched in his sense of responsibility that the very concept of being spoiled is completely alien to him. Chris saw a man who would gladly sleep on the cold, hard floor if it meant his younger members got the comfortable beds, a leader who swallows his own agonizing anxieties and fears so his team never has to taste them. Let's delve deeply into their raw facts of their reality. RM's role isn't just about rapping flawlessly or writing profound poetic lyrics that touch millions of souls. It's about managing the complex, fragile emotional ecosystem of 6 other highly sensitive artists while simultaneously navigating the cutthroat, unforgiving corporate expectations of their massive agency, a burden so gargantuan that it leaves literally zero room for self-indulgence or petty demands. When you carefully watch the behind-the-scenes documentary footage of their recording sessions, pay close attention to the subtle background dynamics. You never see RM asking for touch-ups from the makeup artists or demanding endless vocal retakes to satisfy his own personal ego. Instead, you see him endlessly cheering on his bandmates, analyzing the complex vocal arrangements, and offering that reassuring, warm smile to Chris, all while subtly guiding the massive production ship safely to harbor. Chris Martin was profoundly moved by this staggering display of selflessness, noting that RM's humility isn't some manufactured PR facade meticulously crafted by a savvy management team. It is the raw, unyielding core of his very existence and the true secret to BTS's longevity. To be the leader of BTS means to constantly be in service to others, to be the titanium shield that takes the brutal brunt of the media's criticism and the rock-solid foundation upon which the other members can
can safely build their towering, impossible dreams. Therefore, in Chris's eyes, trying to spoil RM is an absolute exercise in futility, because RM simply won't allow it. His brilliant mind is far too preoccupied with the well-being of his brothers and the sacred integrity of their art to ever care about luxury. The legendary Coldplay frontman realized in that studio that the most powerful man in the K-pop industry is paradoxically the one who asks for the absolute least, proving once and for all that true royalty isn't measured by how much you are served by others, but by how much you tirelessly, selflessly serve those around you, making Kim Namjoon the undisputed king of humility and securing his spot safely at the very bottom of this spoiled list.
Number 6. Suga. Stepping away from the undeniable, self-sacrificing leadership of RM, we dive straight into the shadowed, intensely creative corners of the Hive building, where Chris Martin stumbled upon a completely different, yet equally mesmerizing type of humility that firmly places Min Yoongi at number 6. When you think of global superstars who have broken every conceivable Billboard record, sold out stadiums in minutes, and generated billions for their country's economy, you instantly imagine a life dripping in arrogant excess, private jets, champagne showers, and an endless, exhausting entourage of yes-men, ready to catch their every sigh or cater to their wildest, most absurd whims. But the man known to the world as Suga utterly shatters that stereotypical glamorous illusion with the blunt force of his raw, unapologetic authenticity. Chris Martin, who has spent decades navigating the ego-driven, toxic labyrinth of the Western music industry and has seen his fair share of demanding divas, was profoundly fascinated when he encountered this quiet, cat-like genius who seemingly required absolutely zero maintenance, actively preferring the dim, isolated solitude of his genius lab over any flashing red carpet VIP treatment. During the intensive, highly anticipated recording sessions for My Universe, while others might be desperately seeking vocal validation, asking for endless retakes to stroke their own egos, or demanding luxurious comfort in the green room, Yoongi simply sat back in his rolling chair, quietly sipping his ubiquitous iced Americano, his razor-sharp eyes analyzing every single beat and synth run with the terrifying mathematical precision of a seasoned maestro, completely and utterly detached from the intoxicating, blinding glamour that surrounded him. Why would a man who literally has the entire world at his fingertips, who can buy anything his heart desires with a single, effortless swipe of a black card, actively choose to be so relentlessly low maintenance? To truly understand this mind-boggling phenomenon, we have to forcefully drag ourselves back in time, ripping away the glittering stadium lights of Los Angeles, and plunge directly into the freezing, rain-soaked streets of Daegu, where a young, desperately hungry Yoongi was fiercely fighting for his very survival, selling his meticulously crafted beats for absolute pennies just to afford a single pitiful bowl of noodles, agonizing daily over the excruciating choice of whether to take the bus home or eat dinner. He is a survivor in the most brutal, unforgiving sense of the word, a man who shattered his shoulder in a tragic delivery accident while secretly working a grueling part-time job during his agonizing trainee days, silently swallowing his excruciating physical and mental pain because he vehemently refused to let his desperate, burning dream die in the cold. Chris Martin intuitively felt that profound, lingering history in Yoongi's quiet, stoic demeanor. He didn't just see a K-pop idol. He saw a battle-hardened veteran who inherently understands that fame is a fickle, fleeting illusion, and that true, unbreakable power resides only in the raw music you leave behind. This deeply ingrained, desperate survival instinct makes the very concept of being spoiled entirely repulsive and alien to him. He doesn't demand imported delicacies, absurdly expensive designer clothes, or constant fawning praise from the staff. Instead, his ultimate, most luxurious indulgence is simply having an uninterrupted quiet hour in a dark room to lay down a sick, aggressive hip-hop beat on his MIDI keyboard. But here is the magnificent, heartwarming paradox that Chris observed, a secret, deeply emotional dynamic that only those who look closely can ever truly appreciate. While Yoongi vehemently refuses to ask for anything, his fellow BTS members absolutely refuse to let him be ignored, constantly and aggressively swarming him with loud, chaotic, unavoidable affection.
Have you ever noticed how the chaotic younger members, the so-called maknae line, are always trying to forcefully feed him, hug him from behind, or make him break character and laugh, treating their intimidating, fierce Hyung like a precious, fragile porcelain doll? It is a mesmerizing, almost comical spectacle to witness this hardcore, spitfire rapper who aggressively spits absolute venom on his solo August D tracks, helplessly resigning himself to the aggressive pampering of his bandmates, offering nothing but a tiny, defeated, utterly endearing gummy smile as they forcefully wrap him in warm blankets or shove premium Korean beef into his mouth. Chris Martin was deeply touched by this unspoken, unbreakable brotherhood, realizing that Yoongi isn't spoiled by the management or the staggering, unimaginable wealth they have accumulated. Rather, he is forcefully, relentlessly spoiled with pure love by his own members, the only people on earth who intimately know the terrifying darkness he crawled out of to stand in the blinding light with them. When Chris Martin listened to the raw, emotional Korean rap verse that Yoongi effortlessly penned for their collaboration, a verse that beautifully articulated the painful, desperate longing of finding a comforting light in a suffocating, expansive universe, the Coldplay frontman was allegedly blown away by the fact that someone with such immense, world-shifting talent required absolutely zero ego-stroking in the studio. There were no tantrums over vocal processing, no diva demands for more screen time in the highly anticipated music video, just a humble, fiercely hard-working musician who simply asked, "Is this take good enough for you, Chris?" It begs the incredibly challenging philosophical question, can you ever truly spoil a man whose only real, burning desire is to protect the people he loves and make music until his dying breath? The answer is a resounding, definitive no, because Min Yoongi has built an impenetrable titanium fortress around his soul, where superficial luxuries simply bounce off, leaving only the pure, unadulterated passion for his craft, making him a fascinating, deeply inspiring enigma who demands absolutely nothing from the world, yet somehow manages to effortlessly command its absolute, undivided attention and respect, brilliantly and unequivocally cementing his unshakable position at number 6.
Number 5. J-Hope. Moving steadily up the ranks of this highly classified, intensely fascinating hypothetical observation list, we completely leave behind the dimly lit, profoundly quiet sanctuary of the rap line's underground studios and step directly into a blinding, almost overwhelming spotlight of radiant energy that is entirely commanded by our number 5, the man whose notoriously infectious megawatt smile could literally power an entire metropolitan grid, Jungkook, universally adored by millions as the one and only J-Hope. When Chris Martin first arrived to collaborate on the explosive, chart-shattering anthem My Universe, he was immediately struck by this absolute whirlwind of a human being who seemed to vibrate at a completely different, almost supernatural frequency than the rest of the room, bouncing around the studio, hyping everyone up, and effortlessly dissolving any lingering, awkward cultural barriers with his famously loud, joyous laughter. However, as the legendary Coldplay frontman spent more time carefully observing the intricate, deeply complex internal dynamics of the world's biggest boy band, he quickly realized that behind that dazzling perpetual sunshine lies a fascinating, incredibly meticulous perfectionist with a highly refined, unapologetically expensive taste, earning J-Hope his rightful, slightly elevated spot on the spoiled list. You see, while RM and Suga might completely disregard their immediate physical surroundings, as long as they have a working microphone and a laptop, J-Hope is a man who demands a certain level of pristine aesthetic excellence in his environment, and his fellow members are more than happy to ruthlessly spoil him by desperately trying to maintain it. J-Hope is notoriously, almost aggressively obsessed with cleanliness, organization, and high-end streetwear fashion. He is the undisputed king of limited edition sneakers, extremely rare luxury bags, and meticulously curated, jaw-droppingly expensive outfits that flawlessly blend underground hip-hop grit with Paris Fashion Week elegance.
In the chaotic, often messy ecosystem of 7 young men living and working together for over a decade, J-Hope's beautifully organized hotel rooms and pristine studio spaces are legendary. And there is a hilarious, deeply endearing unspoken rule among the other BTS members. You do absolutely everything in your power to avoid messing up Hobie's immaculate space. Not just because you respect him, but because you are low-key terrified of his legendary spine-chilling disappointment. This brings us to the thrilling, heavily guarded secret of J-Hope's dual personality that Chris Martin undoubtedly witnessed, the terrifying split-second transformation from the giggling, soft-hearted sunshine to the fiercely intimidating, eagle-eyed team captain Jung, the strict dance leader who misses absolutely nothing. When it comes to choreography, musical timing, and stage presence, J-Hope is completely uncompromising, and the sheer level of respect, bordering on reverent fear that he commands from his bandmates, means that they inherently spoil him by constantly seeking his ultimate approval, visibly relaxing only when Hobie flashes a satisfied thumbs up. But to truly, profoundly understand why J-Hope has developed distaste for the finer, more meticulously controlled things in life, we must dramatically rewind the clock and dive deep into the gritty, fiercely competitive underground street dance battles of Gwangju, where a young, desperately ambitious boy known as Smile Hoya was relentlessly grinding on hard concrete floors, putting his fragile body through absolute hell just to earn a shred of recognition. He wasn't born into luxury. He fought tooth and nail for it, surviving agonizingly brutal trainee evaluations and fighting through a deeply traumatic, tear-filled moment pre-debut where he actually packed his bags to leave the group, an event so devastating that RM desperately pleaded with the management to bring him back, declaring that BTS simply could not exist without their beating heart. The colossal, unimaginable pressure of being the emotional anchor and the disciplinary backbone of BTS takes a massive invisible toll, and J-Hope's penchants for luxury shopping, perfectly arranged action figures, and high-end iced coffees are his hard-earned, well-deserved coping mechanisms in a life that is otherwise entirely dictated by exhausting global schedules. Chris Martin was visibly enchanted by this beautiful contradiction during their recording sessions. He saw a man dressed head to toe in stunning, flawlessly coordinated designer gear, looking like $1,000,000, yet the second the recording light turned red, that glamorous superstar instantly stripped away his ego, threw his entire sweating soul into hitting the perfect vocal harmony, and aggressively cheered on his bandmates with zero regard for his own coolness. Furthermore, the glorious irony of J-Hope's placement on this spoiled list is that he is actually one of the absurdly generous people in the entire Korean entertainment industry, a man who is notoriously famous for constantly spoiling everyone else around him, from surprising his members with incredibly thoughtful, personalized, high-value birthday gifts, to sending massive coffee trucks to his friends' drama sets and anonymously donating millions of dollars to various children's charities. J-Hope lives by a magnificent unspoken philosophy. He expects the absolute best from himself. He enjoys the beautiful, luxurious fruits of his relentless labor, but he ultimately utilizes his staggering wealth and immense influence to actively uplift, protect, and heavily pamper the people he loves. Therefore, while he definitely requires a perfectly clean green room, heavily favors exclusive Louis Vuitton drops, and expects a level of professional perfection that would make seasoned industry veterans weep, it is completely impossible to resent him for it. His vibrant, undeniable artistic genius and his bottomless golden heart forcefully command you to give him everything he wants, leaving Chris Martin and the rest of the world completely hypnotized by the immaculate, beautifully complex, and intensely driven phenomenon that is J-Hope.
Number 4. Jin. Crossing perfectly into the exact middle of this highly classified, mesmerizing ranking, we step into the dazzling, theatrically spectacular realm of the group's eldest member, a man whose breathtaking visuals and towering confidence seemingly demand instant royalty treatment, perfectly placing Kim Sok-jin, globally celebrated as the one and only worldwide handsome, right at number 4. When Chris Martin first interacted with BTS, the legendary British rocker was immediately captivated by Jin's unique magnetic aura, leading to that universally famous heart-melting moment where Chris actually gifted Jin his own beloved custom-made acoustic guitar, a magnificent gesture that perfectly encapsulates exactly how Jin operates on the spectrum of being spoiled. You see, at first glance, Jin effortlessly projects the ultimate unbothered image of a high-maintenance pop prince. He is a man who routinely and unabashedly demands immediate praise for his immaculate facial features, hilariously throwing loud theatrical tantrums if his younger members dare to playfully disrespect his absolute authority as the oldest. And he is notorious for possessing an incredibly refined, expensive palate that strictly demands the finest culinary delicacies, heavily prioritizing premium Korean beef, giant lobsters, and perfectly aged wines over standard backstage catering. If you purely observe his chaotic, wildly entertaining variety show appearances, you would instantly assume that Jin is the most spoiled, pampered diva in the entire industry, a guy who aggressively insists on luxurious accommodations and expects the world to seamlessly revolve around his stunningly handsome axis. But Chris Martin, an astute observer of human nature, quickly saw right through this brilliant, meticulously crafted comedic facade. To genuinely understand why Jin sits dead center on this list, perfectly balanced between being lavishly spoiled and fiercely selfless, we must completely shatter the illusion of his arrogant persona and travel back to the unimaginably grim, terrifyingly uncertain early days of BTS, back when they were just 7 desperately broke kids crammed into a tiny, mold-invested dormitory, where the very concept of luxury was an impossible, laughable fantasy. Jin, who actually came from a relatively comfortable background and was originally studying at an elite university to become a serious actor, entirely sacrificed his own comfortable trajectory to take care of these struggling teenagers, secretly utilizing his own personal allowance and borrowing expensive ingredients from his mother's kitchen just to cook warm, nutritious meals for his chronically exhausted, underfed bandmates, famously driving a teenage Jungkook to high school and essentially acting as their surrogate parent when they were hundreds of miles away from their own families. This is the staggering, fiercely emotional paradox of Kim Sok-jin. He loudly demands to be pampered and showered with endless compliments today, precisely because he gave up his own youth and comfort to silently pamper everyone else when they had absolutely nothing, transforming his spoiled diva act into a profoundly beautiful, deeply selfless psychological shield designed purely to lighten the crushing, suffocating pressure on his younger brothers. Chris Martin was reportedly blown away by Jin's stunning silver-toned vocals during the recording of My Universe, especially considering the shocking fact that Jin entered the agency with absolutely zero singing or dancing experience, forced to endure thousands of hours of agonizing, bone-breaking practice in the shadows just to stand shoulder to shoulder with natural-born prodigies like Jimin and Jungkook. When you witness the global superstar today, happily accepting a priceless guitar from his musical idol or proudly parading around in extravagantly expensive Tom Brown suits, you are not watching a spoiled brat throwing his immense wealth around. You are witnessing a resilient, incredibly hard-working veteran finally reaping the magnificent, long-overdue rewards of his silent, agonizing sacrifices. Jin allows himself to be beautifully spoiled by the immense love of his massive fan base, loudly demanding their cheers and dramatically blowing his signature flying kisses, because he intimately understands that his radiating happiness directly dictates the mood of the entire group. As the eldest matinee, the oldest who intentionally acts like the youngest, he deliberately absorbs the terrifying tension in the room by acting foolish and demanding attention, beautifully forcing his stressed-out members to laugh at his ridiculous antics and forget the unbelievable weight of their global fame.
Doesn't it make you passionately question everything you thought you knew about celebrity egos when the guy who most aggressively demands to be called worldwide handsome is actually the one secretly staying up until 4 a.m. agonizing over a single vocal run, desperately trying not to become a burden to his team? In the deeply inspiring, brilliantly complex world of BTS, Kim Sok-jin brilliantly weaponizes the concept of being spoiled, turning it into a hilarious, heartwarming mechanism of love and emotional protection, perfectly commanding the absolute center of this list as a man who undeniably loves the finer things in life, yet would still instantly trade every single diamond and private jet just to ensure his 6 younger brothers never have to experience a single day of hunger or sadness ever again, making him the most magnificent, deeply lovable paradox Chris Martin had ever encountered.
Number 3. Jimin. Stepping into the thrilling, highly emotional top 3 of this magnificent hypothetical countdown, we completely shift gears from Jin's hilarious theatrical demands and plunge deeply into the intensely sensitive, heartbreakingly beautiful, emotional ecosystem of a man who requires a completely different, deeply psychological kind of pampering, firmly securing the position of number 3 for the breathtakingly ethereal, impossibly graceful contemporary dancer of the group, Park Jimin. When the legendary Chris Martin found himself enclosed in the intimate, pressurized environment of the vocal recording booth in Seoul, meticulously guiding the BTS members through the soaring, celestial melodies of My Universe, he was immediately struck by the sheer, devastating vulnerability of Jimin's unique, honey-sweet vocal tone. But what fascinated the Coldplay frontman even more was the incredibly fascinating, almost protective force field of pure love and constant reassurance that the other 6 members instantly threw around this particular singer. You see, when we talk about being spoiled in the context of Jimin, we aren't necessarily talking about a diva throwing a monstrous tantrum over lukewarm room service or aggressively demanding the latest limited edition luxury sports car. Although his undeniably exquisite, highly refined taste as a global ambassador for massive luxury houses like Dior and Tiffany & Co. certainly proves he enjoys the spectacularly finer things in life. Rather, Jimin is fiercely, unapologetically demanding of something far more precious and infinitely rarer in the cutthroat, manufactured world of global superstardom: pure, unadulterated emotional validation and constant, inescapable physical affection. If you carefully observe the fascinating, heavily documented behind-the-scenes dynamics of BTS, you will quickly realize that Jimin operates essentially as the emotional nucleus of the entire group, a man who gives 200% of his bleeding heart to everyone around him, but absolutely demands that same exact, suffocating level of intense love returned to him, completely refusing to function at his highest capacity unless he feels entirely cherished, held, and praised by his brothers. Why does a global icon, a man whose mere seductive gaze on stage can cause literally millions of people to scream and completely lose their minds, require such heavy, constant emotional coddling off stage? To truly comprehend the devastatingly beautiful, deeply fragile psychology of Park Jimin, we have to dramatically rip away the blinding, glamorous illusion of the international pop god and travel back to the grueling, desperately terrifying days of his youth in Busan, where he was a top-tier contemporary dance prodigy who suddenly threw away his entire safe future to chase a nearly impossible idol dream in Seoul, arriving as the very last member to join the BTS lineup with the shortest, most agonizingly compressed training period of them all. This incredibly brief preparation time birthed a massive, terrifying monster of imposter syndrome within Jimin, a crippling, suffocating insecurity that almost got him completely kicked out of the final debut lineup a staggering 8 times, forcing him to ruthlessly sleep only 2 hours a night for months on end, just to aggressively practice in the cold, empty studios until his fragile muscles literally gave out. That profound, agonizingly deeply rooted fear of not being good enough, of potentially dragging his beloved team down, fundamentally sculpted Jimin into the absolute terrifying perfectionist he is today, a man who will relentlessly perform a physically agonizing choreography until his throat bleeds, only to break down in devastating, inconsolable tears backstage if his voice cracks for a single, undetectable microsecond during a massive sold-out stadium concert.
Chris Martin, who has spent decades witnessing the terrifying, self-destructive tendencies of brilliant, insecure artists, undoubtedly recognized that familiar, heartbreakingly heavy weight on Jimin's shoulders, noticing how the younger singer would constantly seek out his vocal producer's eyes, desperately hungry for that crucial nod of approval. Because Jimin pushes his mind and body to such terrifying, imaginably extreme limits to maintain his flawless, angelic persona for the fans, the other BTS members have developed an incredibly strict, unspoken protocol. Jimin must be protected, heavily praised, and ruthlessly spoiled with affection at all absolute costs, treating him like a breathtaking, immensely fragile glass sculpture that could shatter at any given moment if not handled with the utmost care. Have you ever noticed how the terrifying, fiercely intimidating rap line completely melts into a puddle of soft, giggling mush the second Jimin flashes his signature crescent moon eye smile? Or how his soulmate V and the youngest member Jungkook are constantly, almost aggressively touching him, forcefully wrapping him in tight hugs, playing with his hair or physically carrying him around the set just to make sure he feels loved? Jimin doesn't just passively accept this immense, suffocating tidal wave of affection. He actively, hilariously demands it, heavily pouting, crossing his arms and playfully guilt-tripping his bandmates if they dare to ignore him for even 5 minutes, proving that his absolute, undeniable love language is relentless, undivided attention. He is the ultimate, magnificent paradox of a fierce, mesmerizing stage demon who effortlessly commands the entire world's attention with a single, deadly hip thrust, instantly transforming back into a soft, heavily pampered prince who literally needs someone to hold his hand while walking through an airport, making him one of the most fascinating, beautifully complex artists Chris Martin had ever encountered. The phenomenal Coldplay frontman realized that to spoil Jimin is not a tedious chore or a consequence of massive ego. It is an absolutely necessary, beautiful act of emotional survival, a crucial, life-saving exchange of pure energy that safely grounds this intensely sensitive, high-flying swan, perfectly and indisputably locking him into the number 3 spot on this mesmerizing, heavily debated ranking as the undisputed king of emotional luxury.
Number 2. Taehyung. Crashing heavily into the incredibly intense, highly anticipated runner-up spot of this utterly fascinating, mind-bending hypothetical countdown, we abruptly leave behind the desperate need for constant emotional validation and step directly into a visually intoxicating, highly sophisticated alternate universe of pure, unadulterated aesthetic indulgence, boldly claiming number 2 for the breathtakingly unpredictable, fiercely independent free spirit of the group, Kim Taehyung, universally worshipped as the singular enchanting V. When the legendary Chris Martin found himself deeply immersed in the electrifying, highly pressurized recording sessions for My Universe, he was completely mesmerized not only by V's stunning, unbelievably deep baritone voice that effortlessly anchors the group's soaring pop melodies with a rich, velvety gravity, but also by the sheer, unapologetic audacity with which this young man commands his environment, absolutely demanding that the entire world operates strictly on Taehyung time. To genuinely understand why V ranks so dangerously high on this exclusive list of the most spoiled members, you must first comprehend that his specific brand of being pampered has absolutely nothing to do with throwing cheap, superficial celebrity tantrums over backstage catering. Rather, it is deeply rooted in his relentless, uncompromising demand for absolute artistic and atmospheric perfection, a staggeringly expensive, highly refined lifestyle that his immensely wealthy agency and utterly devoted bandmates enthusiastically enable without a single moment of hesitation. Have you ever wondered what actually happens when you give an eccentric, deeply sensitive soul the limitless billion-dollar keys to the entire world? You get a man who spontaneously decides he wants to learn the trumpet at 3 in the morning, waking up his entire household, yet somehow completely evades any anger from his exhausted hyungs because they are too busy cooing over his undeniable, infectious passion. You get an artist who will casually halt a massive multi-million-dollar music video production simply because the specific lighting doesn't perfectly match the moody, vintage cinematic vision playing brilliantly inside his own head. V is the undisputed reigning global king of high-end luxury, a highly sought-after, dazzling international ambassador for powerhouse brands like Celine and Cartier, notoriously dubbed the Gucci Boy early in his career for his spectacular, jaw-dropping ability to effortlessly pull off wildly eccentric, incredibly expensive designer pieces that would instantly swallow any other human being alive. He meticulously curates his immediate surroundings to strictly reflect his deeply romantic, old-soul sensibilities, insisting on spinning rare, extremely expensive vinyl records of classic jazz legends like Frank Sinatra and Chet Baker in his dressing rooms, utterly refusing to interact with the fast-paced, manufactured chaos of the modern idol industry, actively forcing the dizzying, screaming world to aggressively slow down and appreciate the beautiful, quiet details right alongside him. But how did this man, who now regularly sips premium wine in Parisian chateaus and effortlessly rubs shoulders with global fashion elite, develop such a fiercely uncompromising, intensely luxurious set of demands? To uncover this profoundly heartbreaking, intensely emotional truth, we must dramatically rewind the timeline and travel far away from the blinding, glittering lights of Seoul, plunging deep into the quiet, rural agricultural fields of Daegu, where a young, highly imaginative boy firmly believed his ultimate destiny was simply to become a humble strawberry farmer, raised with overwhelming, boundless love by his beloved grandmother. When Taehyung miraculously passed his audition and arrived in the cutthroat, terrifyingly competitive city of Seoul, his loving mother, completely terrified that the wealthy city boys would violently mock her precious son for being poor, famously bought him a wildly expensive, bright red brand-name jacket, a heartbreakingly beautiful sacrifice that deeply ingrained in V a profound, lifelong appreciation for the powerful, protective armor of high fashion. Furthermore, we absolutely cannot ignore the massive, agonizing psychological trauma of his early debut days, where he was heavily subjected to a notoriously cruel, agency-mandated marketing gimmick that forced him to be the hidden member, kept completely out of all early promotional photos and vlogs, while he painfully watched his 6 brothers build a fanbase without him, crying in desperate, suffocating silence because he truly believed he was going to be brutally cut from the group at the very last second. This devastating, deeply terrifying experience of being forcefully erased and entirely ignored birthed an incredibly powerful, unstoppable subconscious desire within V to never ever be overlooked again, brilliantly transforming him into a spectacular, fiercely confident visual maestro who absolutely demands to be seen, heard, and lavishly celebrated on his own unique, eccentric terms. Today, the other 6 members of BTS carry a deep, unspoken collective guilt and overwhelming affection for that terrified, hidden little boy, which translates into them ruthlessly, aggressively spoiling the adult V beyond all reasonable comprehension. They fundamentally refuse to ever tell him no, whether he wants to randomly wander off during a heavily scheduled international tour to silently stare at a painting in a secluded European art gallery, or if he capriciously demands that his members participate in his hilarious, completely unscripted role-play scenarios on live television. They treat him like a breathtakingly rare, wildly unpredictable wild tiger that they have somehow miraculously managed to tame, constantly heavily pampering his wildly shifting moods and passionately indulging his incredibly expensive, highly refined tastes, because they intimately know that when Kim Taehyung is creatively fulfilled, perfectly styled, and completely happy, he possesses the magical, undeniable ability to elevate the entire group's artistic identity to an untouchable, godlike stratosphere.
Chris Martin was reportedly deeply fascinated by this hypnotic, beautifully weird dynamic, observing a young superstar who fiercely rejects the sterile, manufactured behavioral expectations of a traditional K-pop idol, instead choosing to live his life entirely as a walking, breathing piece of expensive, unpredictable performance art. V doesn't just want to exist in the universe, he wants to meticulously paint it, aggressively style it in vintage couture, beautifully score it with a slow jazz saxophone solo, and completely command it with his intoxicating boxy smile, making him a profoundly fascinating, deeply lovable maverick who is unquestionably, beautifully, and relentlessly spoiled by the sheer, unwavering devotion of the men who proudly stand beside him, securing his legendary status at number 2.
Number 1. Jungkook. Arriving at the absolute indisputable summit of this legendary, deeply fascinating hypothetical countdown, we completely shatter every single preconceived notion of what it means to be a global superstar and dive headfirst into the aggressively heartwarming, intensely coddled reality of the youngest member, firmly cementing number 1 for the phenomenally talented, unstoppable pop giant who literally holds the entire hearts of his 6 older brothers securely in his tattooed hands, Jungkook. When the legendary Chris Martin stepped into that highly pressurized vocal booth in Seoul to record the soaring, euphoric chorus of their monumental collaboration, My Universe, he was immediately blown away by Jungkook's flawless, crystalline pop vocal tone. But what absolutely paralyzed the Coldplay frontman with sheer awe was the incredibly bizarre, hilarious, and deeply moving way the other 6 members interacted with this incredibly muscular, heavily pierced, fiercely intimidating global icon. You see, to the rest of the entire world, Jungkook is the ultimate untouchable alpha male of the music industry, a man who effortlessly shatters Spotify records, dramatically performs at the FIFA World Cup opening ceremony, and possesses a terrifyingly intense, dangerously captivating stage presence that causes millions of fans to completely lose their minds on a daily basis. But the very second the cameras stop rolling and he is alone with his BTS members, that ferocious tiger instantly devolves into a demanding, heavily pampered, chaotic toddler who absolutely expects the world to be handed to him on a gleaming silver platter. To profoundly understand why Jungkook undeniably takes the crown as the most aggressively, ridiculously spoiled member of BTS, we must take a devastating, highly emotional journey back in time, far away from his current multi-million-dollar luxury penthouses, right back to the terrifying, intensely uncertain days of 2011, when a painfully shy, severely introverted 15-year-old boy left his family in Busan to live in a cramped, moldy dormitory with 6 complete strangers. This child was so intensely, cripplingly shy that he would literally wait until all the older members had fallen deeply asleep just so he could quickly take a shower without having to interact with anyone, silently crying himself to sleep because he missed his mother with a devastating, heartbreaking intensity. What happened next is arguably the most beautiful, staggeringly emotional phenomenon in the entire history of the global music industry. Those 6 older teenagers, who barely had enough money to feed themselves, collectively made a profound, unspoken vow to fiercely protect, aggressively raise, and completely coddle this fragile boy, utilizing their own meager, hard-earned allowances to buy his school uniforms, packing his tiny lunchboxes in the early hours of the morning, and proudly attending his high school graduation ceremonies as his wildly enthusiastic surrogate parents. Because they aggressively shielded him from the brutal, cutthroat realities of the vicious idol industry, forcefully absorbing all the cruel criticism, exhaustion, and massive pressure so he could simply focus on honing his immense talents, they inadvertently created an absolute monster of a golden child, a man who inherently believes that what is theirs is automatically his, notoriously stealing his Hyung's expensive clothes, eating their meticulously ordered takeout food without ever asking, and aggressively demanding that Jin
Jimin or Suga wake up to cook for him at ungodly hours of the night. Jungkook is fully, hilariously aware of his supreme, untouchable status within the group. He ruthlessly bullies his older brothers, playfully throwing them around with his massive, intimidating physical strength, loudly mocking their heights and completely ignoring their scoldings, knowing with absolute unshakable certainty that they will never, ever genuinely retaliate because they are utterly, hopelessly obsessed with him. Have you ever witnessed the absolutely mind-boggling spectacle of 6 grown men completely halting their busy, exhaustive world tour schedules just to aggressively applaud and coo over their 20-something-year-old bandmate simply because he successfully ate a piece of meat or tied his shoes correctly? Chris Martin reportedly watched this completely fascinating dynamic unfold in real time, witnessing how RM's eyes would instantly soften into pure, glowing paternal pride whenever Jungkook nailed a complex, breathtaking vocal run, or how Jimin and V would instantly rush to physically massage his shoulders the moment he looked even slightly tired, realizing that Jungkook's spoiled nature isn't toxic arrogance or diva behavior. It is the breathtakingly beautiful, living embodiment of his brother's massive unconditional love. But let us dive even deeper into the sheer, unadulterated madness of Jungkook's pampered lifestyle, because the mind-bending rabbit hole of his golden privilege goes so staggeringly deep it completely defies all human logic. Imagine a fiercely independent global superstar who actively chooses to drag 3 massive, ridiculously expensive mattresses into his living room simply because he wants to roll around freely. A man who will spontaneously go live on the internet at 4 in the morning to drink excessively and sing karaoke to millions of people for 4 straight hours, fully knowing that his massive panic-stricken agency and his exhausted older brothers will inevitably clean up whatever chaotic, beautiful mess he leaves behind. During the highly intense, heavily coordinated music video shoot for My Universe, while the other veteran artists were meticulously focusing on camera angles and complex choreography, Chris Martin allegedly witnessed Jungkook just freely, joyously bouncing around the set like an oversized, hyperactive golden retriever, completely unburdened by the crushing, suffocating anxieties of the industry, because his hyungs were physically standing there, acting as his indestructible titanium shield against the entire world. This is a man who literally bought a massive, spectacularly expensive luxury mansion in one of the most exclusive, heavily guarded neighborhoods in Seoul, yet completely prefers to abandon his empty palace just to crash on his hyung's couches, forcefully eating their carefully prepared meals and leaving his massive, chunky combat boots right in the middle of their pristine hallways, a hilariously disrespectful display of absolute dominance that would instantly get anyone else absolutely destroyed in Korean culture. But for Jungkook, it just miraculously earns him a heavy, affectionate sigh and a warm blanket tenderly thrown over his sleeping body. It is a wildly fascinating, brilliantly chaotic psychological study of reverse parenting, where the youngest, most physically dominant member has successfully, meticulously trained his 6 older, exhausted guardians to cater to every single unpredictable whim, from abruptly deciding he wants to suddenly master playing the drums, to aggressively demanding they film complex, physically exhausting TikTok dance challenges with him on their incredibly rare, precious days off. And the most beautifully devastating, intensely emotional part of this entire magnificent equation, Jungkook secretly, passionately loves them with the exact same terrifying, world-shaking intensity, fiercely dedicating his entire record-breaking solo career and every single one of his monumental achievements directly back to the 6 men who painstakingly built his universe, proving that his ridiculously spoiled, high-maintenance behavior is simply the loudest, most chaotic form of absolute, pure devotion, demanding their endless attention because he simply cannot imagine a single second of his life without them in it. Jungkook undeniably reigns supreme at number 1 on this list, not because he demands expensive cars, private jets, or luxurious mansions from his staff, but because he boldly, unapologetically demands the absolute undivided souls of his 6 older brothers, and they eagerly, joyfully surrender it to him every single day without a single regret.
And there you have it, the ultimate mind-bending conclusion to Chris Martin's deeply fascinating, highly hypothetical journey through the intensely complex, wildly emotional ecosystem of BTS, completely shattering everything you thought you knew about fame, luxury, and massive celebrity egos. What this incredible, sweeping, edutainment narrative ultimately proves is that in the fiercely guarded, heavily bonded universe of these 7 legendary brothers, the traditional toxic concept of being spoiled simply does not exist. Instead, it is entirely replaced by a breathtaking, profoundly inspiring economy of pure, relentless love, where immense wealth and global power are never used to cruelly look down on others, but are brilliantly weaponized to aggressively uplift, fiercely protect, and heavily pamper the people who miraculously survive the darkest, most terrifying trenches of the entertainment industry right by their side. Whether it is RM's unshakable monastic humility keeping him solidly grounded at the very bottom, Jin's hilarious, dramatic demands for adoration beautifully shielding his brothers from pressure, or Jungkook's aggressively coddled golden boy supremacy demanding the entire world at the absolute top, every single ranking brilliantly exposes the staggering, beautiful truth that BTS's ultimate, most luxurious flex isn't their record-breaking stadium tours, their Grammy nominations, or their limitless bank accounts. It is their unbreakable, desperately, fiercely loyal brotherhood that continues to absolutely conquer the entire world, one deeply emotional, heavily pampered moment at a time. The next time you see these 7 global icons effortlessly dominating a stage, look closely at the subtle touches, the secret smiles, and the invisible titanium threads of affection connecting them. Because that is the true, untouchable wealth of BTS, an extraordinary once-in-a-lifetime phenomenon that leaves even legendary rock stars completely speechless.